We experience things every single day. Conversations, routines, brushing our teeth in the morning, pressure from work, and if you're from Bangalore, definitely risk while riding in Bangalore. But why do only some of those experiences shape you? If we really learn through experiences, as most of us are told, then shouldn't we be growing constantly? Shouldn't every hard day make us wiser, every mistake sharpen us? But if we're honest with each other, that's not really what ends up happening, most of the time at least. Some experiences stay with us, but most just fade into the background, into our memories, and eventually into nothing at all. Picture this, you're cutting tomatoes in the kitchen. You let your mind wander a little too much, and now the only red thing on the cutting board is not the tomatoes. So you patch yourself up, and now every time after that, you're suddenly aware. You've learned something. But in our relationships, we make the same communication mistakes every single day, escalating tensions, hurting people, but we don't really seem to learn from that. Why is that? What's the difference between these two? Why does one become learning, but the other just fades away? The answer to that question and that shift is at the heart of what experiential learning is. Observation itself isn't really enough. We can observe life all day long, but it's never going to change us. What transforms a simple observation into an experience, into really living life, is what happens after that. So I thought I'd start with a memory that's quite close to me. When I was in school, I had a physics teacher named Desai. He impacted me in such a way that it has transformed the way I've thought about everything since then. And mind you, that was in the 10th grade. It's changed the way I approach learning itself, not just the subject of physics. And here's where it started. He was teaching us Newton's laws. And instead of just writing his laws on the board, he gave us each a marble and split us into teams. And he said, be as creative as possible, use whatever materials you want. But here are the rules. I want to see this marble go through certain energy transfers. And at the end, I don't know how you're going to do it, but you're going to make a water balloon burst. And as kids, that was super exciting. So he gave us a challenge and he gave us some ground rules. And now for the next week, our houses all became laboratories. Marbles rolled everywhere, books fell down, and water balloons burst, much to the dismay of the parents at home, who probably regretted agreeing to this experiment. But nonetheless, something happened in us. You see, we failed constantly, but every failure forced us to question things internally. What went wrong? Why did it go wrong? How can I make it better? What's actually happening here? We paused, we thought, we assessed, we adjusted, and then we tried again until we came up with a working solution that honestly remains one of my most fun memories till date. After all the chaos, after we had all demonstrated our experiments, he made us all sit down and write down what had happened. He asked us to name the energy transitions. He asked us to really question what happened. Was this gravitational potential energy? Was it elastic energy? Was it kinetic energy? What was really happening? When a marble rolled down a slide and eventually toppled into a dominoes, and then the dominoes caused some weight to change, eventually letting the balloon fall down. What really happened? You see, the more we sat down and thought about this, wrote it down and experimented with it, energy cannot be created or destroyed, simply transferred. It just popped out of what we were doing, what we were experiencing. It's not something that had to be taught to us. It was something that was orchestrated and allowed us to learn that by ourselves. And what's so powerful about that is that now any one of us could just walk into a street, and when we saw a car moving down, we understood what was happening. It wasn't just a sentence anymore. It was something that we lived, we experienced. We understood it differently, not just for an exam, but we understood it in lived experience. And more importantly, there's a word I feel is very important: cross-contextually. This wasn't just locked into physics. We could see it everywhere we went. See, because that's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Because while knowledge lives on paper, wisdom moves with you. Every bounce of the ball, every braking car, every rubber band snapping back and forth as we were trying to torture each other, that registered as a law of motion in our minds. We lived it and experienced it. And in that is one of the most powerful things about experiential learning. It's not locked into one context. It becomes a part of you. Not simply knowledge, but wisdom. It changes your paradigm. the lens through which you view life itself is changed. So, where did this idea really come from? For that, we travel back in time, way back to ancient Greece.
Warm summer evening in ancient Greece.
Well, probably earlier, but just for the sake of this explanation, let's go way back to ancient Greece. Aristotle. He believed that knowledge began in the senses. In other words, the way you experience the world through your physical body and through your mental process. You understood the world by encountering it. Centuries later came someone named John Dewey. He argued that education was not meant to be passive, or rather that it shouldn't be. He argued school shouldn't merely just prepare you for life, it should be life itself. Because by doing something, we are prepared for it. If we live life in school, we inevitably are prepared for life, not just told about life. Kurt Lewin then noticed something crucial, and I think this applies very much to kids, or most of us. People don't simply change just because they're told something. They change when they act, and then, most crucially, when they reflect on that action. And eventually, in the 1980s, comes a man we're all too familiar with, David Kolb. He sat down and organized all these different threads of thought into one simple, unified, beautiful model called the Kolb's learning cycle. What he discovered, or rather what he pieced together, was that learning is not a straight line. It's a cycle. So what is this cycle? Well, it begins with experience. You step into something, you act, you try, but most people stop there. And that's why most experiences don't change us. We simply do, but we don't move on to the next crucial step, which, again, we go back to ancient Greece for. Aristotle's great granddad of education, I suppose you could say, was Socrates. And something that Socrates pioneered was his mode of understanding the world, which was the Socratic method. He believed that all knowledge already existed inside the subject, but simply needed to be drawn out through skillful questioning. Why do you believe that? What do you mean by that? Does your belief hold true in all of these circumstances or just one? What happens if we switch the subject? He asked questions that made people deeply think about their own convictions, because he believed that knowledge wasn't something that you pour into someone, but rather something that is brought out. Almost like midwifery, where you help someone give birth, but you're not the one giving birth yourself. You see, reflection slows experience down. And in today's day and age, that's something that we should understand more than any other time in history. We're so process and efficiency driven, and our gadgets have basically become an additional limb to us. We experience life on the fly. Every second a new reel, every second a new trend. We never have time to just slow down and pause. Reflection slows experience down long enough for a moment to go from that happened to what does that really reveal about that moment? That's a profound change. You see, without reflection, experience simply becomes a memory, and memories don't last that long if they're not anchored to something powerful. With reflection, a memory becomes insight. We start noticing patterns. We move from simply an event to a principle. It's the same reason why Newton was able to discover the law of gravity. Gravity existed. Apples fell from trees all the time. But you see, when that apple fell and hit Newton's head, he didn't simply just experience it and then let it go. He sat and he reflected and he pondered and he thought. And that slowing down of an experience allowed him to notice a pattern. And we can apply that to our day-to-day lives. None of us are strangers to pressure or breaking down from pressure. But when that happens, if we simply move on from the experience, labeling it as that was frustrating, we're missing out something deeper. Reflection would show us that maybe we have a problem where we shut down when we're faced with pressure. And then we notice the patterns underlying that behavior. In the case of my physics experiment, it was the difference from saying, oh, that marble fell too soon, to, oh, the angle caused it to increase in momentum. And you see then, a pattern is noticed. A theory is born from lived experience. And then comes experimentation. You try again, but this time slightly differently. With new knowledge, with new insight, with a new pattern noticed. You adjust the angle. You change your tone when you're talking to someone. You speak earlier, or perhaps you decide not to speak at all. Experimentation closes this loop. It goes from something that's simply abstract to something that we see lived out. Without experimentation, reflection just becomes rumination. It remains inside of your head. But unless we see it lived out, we don't know if this reflection is true or false, whether it's valuable or it's to be discarded. We think, but we don't transform. Experimentation closes the loop. Experience, reflection, understanding where we notice patterns, and finally, experimentation. And then you turn to experience again, but not as the same person. Someone who's ready to learn and who has noticed new patterns and put them into effect and seen the change that they have on the world around them. So now that we know what the process is, why is it that it works? You see, we don't learn as detached observers. We learn when something feels significant. Emotion sharpens attention, attention strengthens memory, and reflection organizes experience into meaning. Meaning then influences behavior, and repeated behavior eventually shapes your identity. That's why you remember embarrassment from 10 years ago, but not 10 lectures that you've sat through. We aren't just storage devices. We are meaning-making creatures. It's in our DNA. It's by design. We constantly seek for meaning in the world around us, patterns around us. And there's a fascinating neuroscience behind this, how emotion strengthens encoding, how reflection deepens neural pathways, and how repetition stabilizes learning. But that's a deeper talk for another day. For now, it's enough to know that this works not just because it's a fancy process, but because it mirrors how humans naturally grow. We aren't fighting the current, nor are we simply going with the flow. We're using the current to get to where we want to go. So, if transformation requires a full cycle, why can something like a 3-day camp shift something in you that a whole decade of work hasn't? What is it about such a small experience that's so powerful? You see, because it's not simply about duration, it's about density. As we often say, quality over quantity. Daily life is so scattered, as we've already touched upon. You experience something, you move on, you scroll, you forget. Loops always remain unfinished. We start the learning process and then quickly fade off because we're already on to the next experience. No experience is ever journeyed with long enough for something meaningful to emerge from it. We simply scroll and move on to the next thing. And that affects the way we experience life even without our devices. But in an immersive environment, be it camp or anything else, distraction lowers, intensity rises, and feedbacks become almost immediate. We're geared to reflect, but we don't normally get the time to do so. You act, you see the outcome, and you reflect almost instantly. You adjust and you try the same thing on the same day. You see, another thing that I relate to when I look at this process is so very often we experience life, we go back, we sit in our bed, and yes, we might be scrolling, but we're also reflecting on the day. But that reflection doesn't turn into anything. It's simply background information. And by the time we're done scrolling, we've already forgot what we reflected on. We don't give ourselves enough space or time to try again and to see what's come of our reflection. And so the loop remains unclosed and eventually forgotten. This is how the cycle tightens. Instead of stretching it across months of fragmented thoughts, it unfolds within hours. And when the cycle tightens, growth accelerates. But there's something even deeper. You see, there's another part about human design. We are social beings. We were always meant and designed for community. And learning happens best with community. There's something really powerful about you entering a space and thinking, I'm not the type of person who talks. I'm introverted. And that's something that society has really grown fond of, labeling us as introverts, extroverts, ambiverts. But when we enter a space with these labels and we watch them slowly fall away, because you might have been the person that didn't have anything to say, but suddenly you're in an activity that's so much fun that you can't help but speak. And then someone comes up to you and says, hey, that was a really thoughtful insight. Now you've gone from someone who thinks they can't speak well to suddenly someone who's appreciated, someone who's valued for what they have to share. That means more than just experimentation by yourself. When you hear feedback from someone else acknowledging something that you have spent time thinking about, processing, and then putting out into the world. And that's also why good facilitation matters. Asking the right questions at the right time can spark much needed conversations. And articulation clarifies thinking. You see, a big problem we have is that we think and do not speak. But when we speak, we're forced to really confront what we're thinking in our minds. It's only when we put it out into the world where sometimes we pause and say, do I really believe that? And then when we hear other people share their perspective, our understanding expands. Community always adds more. Community adds mirrors, encouragement, accountability, and witness to the change that you've gone through, reinforcing the fact that the cycle does work. It reinforces change. The identity shift now becomes social, and social identity sticks. Think back to your childhood. There's a reason why we craved so much to be the popular kids, or to have a niche, or to be that kid who had that specific something. We were always meant to be social creatures, and entering an environment which is nurturing and which allows this whole cycle to be completed helps you discover your own identity, not force one on you. That is why short experiences ripple. Not because they're dramatic, but because they are concentrated and intentionally designed. They are guided, they are shared, and once someone experiences themselves differently, as brave or capable or resilient or bold or even capable of speaking out in public, it's really hard to go back. So, we started with the question, if we experience things every day, why don't we grow every day? Now we know, experience alone doesn't transform us. Experience, reflection, understanding, and experimentation. Maybe the goal isn't bigger moments, but simply being more intentional in the ones that we already have. Modern society convinces us to keep chasing something bigger, something grander, something more extreme or dangerous. But what if we already have enough but simply aren't experiencing them as enough? You see, that's the difference between merely floating through life versus actively living and experiencing it. Being intentional about the moments we have, noticing these cycles and giving us enough space to reflect on them. Because the difference between living and learning is what we do after the moment passes. That is experiential learning, and this is TED Talk. Thanks for watching.